Looks like we're live. Okay. Welcome to our Wednesday edition of Facebook Live from Disability Rights Maryland, our now biweekly questions and answers. My name is Leslie Seid-Margolis. I'm a managing attorney at Disability Rights Maryland, and I am joined tonight by our assistant managing attorney, Megan Berger, and by Tasha Marshall, our education paralegal, by Susana Barrios, our outreach advocate. And we have a special guest tonight, Ann Geddes, who is the policy director at the Maryland Coalition of Families. And we're going to start out with Ann talking a little bit about Maryland Coalition of Families while you all put your questions in the chat box, which we will then address. We do not have our captioning person yet. We're hoping that that person will join shortly. And we do have Susana here to interpret if anybody needs interpreting in Spanish. I also want to ask that as you post questions, or even if you're just listening, if you can just shoot a quick message in the chat box about where you are calling from. We're trying to figure out who's contacting us, who's not contacting us, where we may need to do some additional outreach. So please just put in the box where you're from. And just by way of description for people who may not have cameras or may not be able to see us, I have dark hair, I'm white, I'm sitting in my home office with dark blue, very, very soothing walls. And right now I feel the need for something very soothing. So I'm glad to be here. And I am going to turn it over to Ann to tell us a little bit about herself and to tell us what the Maryland Coalition of Families does and how it can be useful to you as parents and to your families. So thank you, Ann, for being
here. Yeah, thank you, Leslie. So my name is Ann Geddes. I'm the Director of Public Policy for the Maryland Coalition of Families. I am white, 60-ish, with brown hair. And I'm really delighted to be here talking to you today and describing some of our services at the Maryland Coalition of Families. So to sum up what we do, we provide family peer support services to families that are caring for a child with mental health needs. And that's what I'm really going to talk about today. We also provide family peer support services to any loved one caring for someone with a substance use or problem gambling disorder. So where kids are involved, we do mental health and with helping parents and caregivers. Where substance use and problem gambling are involved, the target person can be any age. It could be a child of 17, or it could be your parent who's 60. And so we're working in those fields as well. But today I'm going to talk about our work with children's mental health. So we provide what we call family peer support. So all of our staff people have lived experience caring for a child with mental health needs. And that connection brings a lot to the relationship, that lived experience. I've walked a similar path. I've navigated similar systems, and I can give you emotional support and help navigating systems as well, because our staff have that experience navigating systems, and they've been trained on a variety of systems. They help with education, they help with mental health treatment care, they help with families that have a child involved with Department of Juvenile Services or Department of Social Services. They can assist with navigating all those systems. So what we do, first of all, anybody can self-refer to us. We sometimes get referrals from outsiders, and today I'm going to talk about a couple of cases where that did happen, but we have a self-referral line, and I believe that our web address is going to be in the chat box, and you can find our referral number there, and anybody can self-refer. We help a lot of families with kids with co-occurring disorders. They have a mental health diagnosis and maybe have an autism spectrum diagnosis, or they have a learning disability. We often support families with children with what we call co-occurring disorders. So what we do is we usually meet with families in person when we're contacted. We have staff across the state who typically will meet a family either in the family's home or in one of our offices or in a public space like a library or a Panera, to get a general idea of what help the family is asking for. And then, whatever it is, we believe that services should be family driven. So what the family wants help with, and what they feel they need is what we try to help them attain. We don't judge or say, no, you shouldn't be doing that. Our services are family driven. And a lot of times we're contacted by people who are having problems, struggling with their school, or their child is struggling in school and they don't know what to do. I have one of the examples I wanted to talk about today was our staff. I asked our staff for some concrete good examples of what families have come to them for help and what they did in response to those families reaching out. So very frequently we're asked about special education services. We are not professional advocates by any stretch of the imagination. We are familiar with IDEA, but we can help a family basically navigate IDEA and the requirements, and we can emotionally support a family. IEP meetings can be very intimidating. You've got 10 experts there, and you're there trying to represent, advocate for your child. So when we can, we'll go to IEP meetings with families. This staff person told me about actually a doctor referred a mother to MCF, and our referral line, they connect folks with the family peer support specialist in their region. So this family came to Becca, and their doctor recommended that they contact MCF. They had a 7th grader with ADHD who was really struggling in school. And the family peer support specialist met with the mom and walked her through writing a letter to the principal of the school to request evaluation for special education services. She walked her through that process, what that letter should look like. And after a meeting was set, our family peer support specialist attended the meeting with the mother, and the decision was made that assessments were needed. So then there was, in this particular case, there was some acrimony between the mother and the school, because in the IEP meeting, it was found out that the young woman, the child with ADHD, had been referred for special education services a number of years prior, and that hadn't been followed through with. So the mother was upset, felt like there were lost years. And so one of the things our family peer support specialists do is help mediate, a helpful conversation between a family and the school. Try to keep things, not really adversarial, but cooperative, and our family peer support specialist felt that was really important in this case, helping the mother not, she rightfully had reason to be upset, but to help her work collaboratively with the school to put together the best plan in place for the child. And the current status, I guess, of this family is they're waiting on assessments because of COVID. They started them and they're waiting for them to be completed. This family also was, our family peer support specialist ended up having her contact Parents Place for help with that assessment issue during COVID. So that's one thing that we've done. And that's a very frequent issue that comes up with families, is they need help navigating that educational system, special educational system. Another thing that we do for kids with mental health needs, a lot of times they have cases that are brought before the local care teams. Local care teams are multi-agency teams that get together in each jurisdiction, sometimes regularly, sometimes sporadically, to look at kids with special needs who may be at risk of an out-of-home placement, what community-based services can be wrapped around the child and family to help keep the child successfully in the community. And our staff often serve on local care team meetings as the family representative who's there to help the family advocate for themselves. And a lot of families contact us inquiring about voluntary placement agreements. They feel that their child needs placement in a residential treatment center. They've perhaps been a doctor or a hospital has recommended that, and they have no idea how to access that. And they're referred, DSS will refer them to us to help, first of all, see what community-based services can help be designed for a family. Can they go into targeted case management program? Our family peer support specialists help families that are in the targeted case management program develop plans of care and work with a care coordinator, again, to advocate for themselves and what their family needs and what they think should be in that plan of care. And we accompany families to the local care team meetings. In this case, the family peer support specialist did help line up targeted case management, PRP services, psychiatric rehabilitation program services, and interventions with the school, not special education, but other interventions with the school to help this child stay in the community. It turned out then that the child was successful for a while, but regressed. So then the family peer support specialist did help with the voluntary placement agreement, getting that in place, helping the family advocate for that. And the young man is now awaiting placement in a diagnostic center. The VPA was approved, and he's waiting placement because I don't know, a lot of the residential facilities right now in Maryland are struggling. The diagnostic centers in particular are full. There are shortages of beds in some of the facilities, so there can be a lot of waiting. And we help. We just help a shoulder to lean on. That's the philosophy, is one family helping another family, one family who's been there helping another family who's going through it right now. So that's
Thank you.
basically what we are.
And do you charge for your services, or are
No, all of our services are at no charge to families. We are funded by various state agencies, so all of our services are free of charge. And there's no really time limit either. We will help a family oftentimes with a particular challenge that they're going through, and then the case will close, and then another challenge will come up, and it's not like there's a time limit to how much help we can give. We have some families that we call our forever families because they just, need constant help. And our staff will help with other things as well. They've helped with energy assistance, food assistance, housing assistance, employment services. They'll hook families up to resources in the community to get that kind of help.
It's really good to know. And as much as I know about the services you provide, I didn't realize you were doing that. So thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. We had a viewer that has a question for Ann, and that question is, do you have bilingual staff?
We have bilingual staff. Yes, we have a Spanish-speaking staff person who serves the entire state, and we're hoping to hire another Spanish-speaking staff person. And the referral line, you can make referral. One of the options is to speak with a Spanish-speaking referral specialist.
I was just going to say, I know I've worked with several families doing special education representation or representation on in a discipline case, and I have worked, and the family has also been working with somebody from MCF, and it's been really nice actually for me to partner with the MCF worker and the family, and to have sort of all of those supports working at the same time. And so I've definitely seen firsthand how much of a support the MCF workers are for families, and it makes a real difference.
One of the things we focus on a lot also is self-care, helping families, because the old adage, you can't help your child, you can't, when the oxygen mask drops down, put it on yourself first and then put it on your child. So we firmly believe that families need to practice self-care so that they can really help support their child. And so a lot of what we focus on with families is self-care.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions that have come in? Doesn't look like it. So if anybody is out there listening, please do send your questions in. And
looks like we do have another question, Leslie.
Excellent.
And it's from our same viewer. She heard that Maryland Coalition offers trainings, and she wants to know how often those trainings are available.
Yes, we do. So we have a Family Leadership Institute, which consists of 6 weekends of training in January through April. And that is very intensive. That's Friday night and all day Saturday on 6 different weekends. That's called our Family Leadership Institute, and that is only held once a year in Central Maryland. But we have what we call Family Leadership Retreats. So those are weekend events that we hold across the state, training events that are just one weekend, Friday night and Saturday. We provide hotel accommodations and meals, and just have a bunch of folks in a hotel conference room going through lots of different topics. Special education is always one of the topics. And self-advocacy, advocating for yourself and your child is always one of the topics as well. And so those family leadership retreats, we have 2 of them a year, Western Maryland, Baltimore cities. I think the ones this year, I think there's one in Southern Maryland, Calvert, St. Mary's, and Charles counties, and then one in Western Maryland. I think those are the 2 for this year, but we go all across the state with those weekend ones. And on our webpage is information about those training opportunities. They're also offered free of charge through a grant from MSTE.
So Anne, you said at the beginning, and we know that you're the public policy director for the coalition. Do you want to talk a little bit about the systemic work that you're doing in addition to the family support and
Right.
how they link together?
Yeah, sure. So that's the second part of our mission. I mean, if you look at our mission statement, it is to provide family peer support services to families. And then the second part is we're to work to improve systems. And so I serve on a number of committees to bring the voice and experience of families to the table, families caring for a child with mental health needs. I meet with our staff regularly and get feedback on what families are encountering, what challenges they're encountering, what systems are working, what are the barriers, what systems are not working. So, I bring that to a lot of the committees that I sit on, that information about what families are experiencing. And, a lot of times positive change happens as a result of those meetings. We also advocate during the legislative session. We have bills that are our priority bills that we sometimes send families down to organize families to come down and testify on. And we have a big family day in Annapolis every year, which, all of this is the, you know, COVID, right? So we don't meet one-to-one with families now. We meet one-to-one via Zoom. And we usually, our Family Leadership Institute and Family Leadership Retreats are all via Zoom now. And we usually have in Annapolis in February, what we call Family Day in Annapolis, and we bus folks from across the state. We hire buses and bring people in, again, free of charge. And we make appointments for all of them with their legislators. So they come down, they have breakfast, and then they go out in small groups of people with like legislators to meet and tell them what their priorities are. Tell them a little bit about their story of caring for a child with mental health needs, and then what do they want? What they want their ask to be. And last year we had 165 people come down to Annapolis, and we visited, oh gosh, a lot of, I'm not remembering the number, a lot of legislators. But this year we're not gonna be able to do that. So the whole legislature is gonna be meeting weird ways this year. So who knows what's gonna look like actually, but that advocacy piece is an important part of our work to change, improve systems for kids and families.
Thank you. So I want to make sure that we provide a couple of updates on COVID-related issues. So Megan, you and I can do that. One of the things that I just wanted to make sure people are aware of is that anybody who may be listening to this or tune in later from Anne Arundel County knows that Anne Arundel County Public Schools on its website has posted a policy that has if your child cannot wear a mask, they cannot be transported, cannot attend school, there are no exceptions. So we know, we have been getting calls, we know that there are families whose children were able to return to non-public schools, and families who were preparing for their children to return on a hybrid schedule to school. And that process has stopped. We know that there are students who have now not been allowed back to school because they can't be transported and their parents are unable to transport them. We have been in touch with Anne Arundel County Public Schools. Our understanding is that a revised policy and protocol are in the process of being developed that will allow for exceptions. We have not seen that. We have written to the superintendent and asked that we be provided with a copy. So stay tuned, but know that this is a problem and we are working on it. If you are in Anne Arundel County and your child has been excluded from school because of this policy or excluded from transportation, do feel free to be in touch with us. And I believe the contact information for Susanna is in the chat box, but please feel free to contact our office. The other thing that I wanted to say is we know that as of today, Baltimore County Public Schools announced that it will not be reopening as planned in November. The plan had been to bring students at the special education schools back on a hybrid basis, and they have stopped that process and will not be bringing back staff or students. So we are aware of that. And again, if your child is struggling with distance learning and you were thinking, okay, I can hang on for another couple of weeks, but now it's not coming to an end. If your child needs support beyond what you can reasonably provide to access distance learning or to participate in distance learning, feel free to contact us or, at least ask questions if you're out there listening. We've addressed this in a lot of our Q&As, and we're fine continuing to address this in our Q&As, particularly because this does appear to be a much longer process than anybody anticipated that it would be. So Megan, what do you want to share with parents at this point? And I don't know if you want to raise some discipline maybe issues about what parents should be aware of in case schools are disciplining kids at home. And there have been some cases in places other than Maryland. So you might want to talk about that.
Thanks, Leslie. So yeah, I'm happy to talk about some of the issues that may arise, in terms of discipline, especially. I know the longer this goes on with students in home, almost, the harder it is, because I think, the kids are in their home environments and it's easy to become distracted. And I think it's getting old for some of the students. So we have heard sort of other stories outside of the state of Maryland, some alarming things, discipline wise. And so I think some of the red flags are that we've heard of some discipline for kids who maybe aren't turning on their camera or aren't turning on their microphone. So if there are discipline issues, if your student is, if your child is being told, they have to be separated in a separate breakout room because they're not participating with their video or their microphone, or they're otherwise excluded from the virtual environment because of camera or microphone issues, that's definitely something to give us a call about. We've also heard stories from other states where kids are playing with toys in their environment. I know, kids are going to school in their rooms, and a child in another state had like a toy gun, playing with it in front of the screen, and that prompted disciplinary action, and the child was removed from virtual learning. So if there are any incidences where your child is being disciplined or again told that they can't participate in virtual learning, or being separated to a sort of a separate breakout room because of behaviors on camera, we want to hear about that as well. And I think, everybody is trying to come to the table, and I know the school systems and the districts are trying to approach this with, everybody knows the social emotional needs of all of our students are heightened right now. There are increased stressors on the students, there's increased stressors on the families. And so I know that teachers and administrators are trying to really approach distance learning, with sensitivity towards the increased social emotional issues. And that will especially be the case once there is transitioning back to in-school programs. And I know in some counties, kids are back and they are doing hybrid and they are in school. So I think just generally, if you're concerned that the school's taking a punitive approach, or there are behaviors that are related to the COVID safety protocols. So say you're in a district where students have returned hybrid. We know that, there are districts where kids are back in school. And if there are issues with not wearing masks and they're getting disciplined, or there's issues with not following, not staying 6 feet apart and the students being disciplined. That's another red flag, is if there's discipline issues related to these new safety protocols that we know students have to learn. And this is a teaching moment, and it's sort of built into teaching in the first months of school, is teaching the kids how to do this new normal. So those are just a few of the things that, just to keep in the back of your mind. We have not received many discipline concerns, calls, and so I'm hoping that that's a good thing. But it doesn't mean that it's not happening. We know that it is happening out of state, and so just want to make sure that parents know that that is something to be on your radar as well.
So I just want to tag on to what you said, Megan, that that certainly there is a teaching moment for using masks and keeping social distance. There is a small number of students who even trying to teach and implement those safety measures, the students are not able to wear masks and don't understand why they need to wear masks and aren't able to comply with social distancing requirements. And clearly discipline, but you can't discipline them on the basis of disability, but neither can you just automatically exclude them from school. So under the Americans with Disabilities Act, reasonable accommodation needs to be made, and the defense to that is whether the person poses a direct threat. So in looking at that, right, the school system would need to look at whether the child poses a direct threat, and can't just say, oh, because the child can't comply with a mask requirement or can't keep social distance, they automatically pose a direct threat, because there are steps the school system can take to mitigate that potential risk. You know, on the bus, they can keep the windows open. The parent maybe could get on the bus and strap the child into a harness. If the child wears a harness, the school staff can take the child off the bus so that the bus aide doesn't have to be in close contact with the child. I mean, there are definitely accommodations that can be made. If the child is a spitter or a biter, then, you know, there still are things that that the school system can do to mitigate the risk, and that direct threat is a pretty high standard. So so lots of work that needs to be done before a school system can just say, sorry, your child can't come, and or we're suspending your child. I mean, you can never suspend a child for behavior that is the result of a disability, but we want to make sure that parents know that if a school team or a school system tries to say automatically no, that there needs to be a more individualized consideration. And just in general, I would say that anytime you as a parent hear we always, or we never, or our policy is this, and there are no exceptions, that should always set off a red flag, because under federal law, there's a lot of individualization, the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, but also Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which is a general civil rights statute that requires reasonable accommodation and prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in programs that get federal funding, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, which extends those protections to state and local governments and to places of public accommodation. So, so anytime you get that, you know, we never or we always, or it's our policy and there are no exceptions, red flags should and alarm bells should be going off in your head, and you should be challenging that, or contacting us or contacting others who can respond to that, because it's a problem. So what else should we talk about in our time? Nobody's asking questions, but I'm assuming that people will watch this after the fact. So what else should we address? Do you have any questions, Anne, for us? Anything that is coming up over and over with the families you're serving that it would be helpful for us to address?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're probably addressing it. It's just all the challenges with COVID, and especially in the schools, there are, like I said, this one example I gave, this question of assessments. When do assessments need to be completed? My child has been waiting since February for assessments to be completed, and what should I do? And of course, that's a complicated kind of question right now. I know that, that different districts are responding in different ways, unfortunately. but that's something that's come up a lot. And the other thing, kids with significant behavior problems, and a lot of our families have kids with significant behavior problems, just cannot do remote learning. If they have, and the accommodations are not working for them. Kids with ADHD are not being able to engage like they would engage with accommodations in the classroom. We've heard that there are a lot of kids were receiving mental health treatment via telehealth, and now that they're doing remote learning all day, they do not have the stamina to engage in mental health treatment via telehealth. So they're not actually getting any treatment right now, which of course makes matters worse. So there are just so many barriers with COVID, and so many uncertainties, I think, that families and youth are struggling with. But that testing is a big thing, and I don't know, maybe I can ask that question. I mean, what is the status with testing right now? Is it correct that some jurisdictions are moving forward and others aren't? That's my understanding. And that, or should I not ask that question?
Do you want to take that on, Megan?
That's one of the big questions we've been getting lately.
Sure. Yeah, I can start, and then Leslie, you can sort of add too. It is a difficult question, and from what we've been seeing, it is sort of varied by the district and whether that district has returned to school or has returned hybrid, or whether they have assessment centers. We know, some districts have started in-person assessments. Even some of the students are virtual, but they are doing in-person assessments. We know some districts are planning to or have already set up sort of assessment centers that are sort of specifically set up for them to be able to catch up on all of the sort of assessments that are pending, and they know that students are waiting on these assessments. I think the most important thing to know, sort of big picture, is that the timeline for assessments has not been waived and is still, the school districts are still held to the timeline. However, we know that practically speaking, they are not keeping up with the timeline. And so that's obviously, that's a real issue that's going to have to be sort of dealt with through compensatory education, recovery services. But in the meantime, I think it's advocating and sort of figuring out the specifics of your district, requesting that IEP meeting, following up, and seeing when the in-person assessments can be done. And some assessments can be virtual. So I think another thing that we've been advising some families is, depending on the type of assessments that are required for a certain student, if it's sort of an initial eligibility, what's the suspected disability, and what are the comprehensive package of assessments that need to be done, and meeting with the team and figuring out what can be done virtually and what really needs to be done in person, and starting everything that can be done virtually now and doing the assessments that can be done virtually now, so that if there are only pieces that have to be done in person, then those can be done as quickly as possible once they're in person. But I don't think there's any easy answer, and we know from our clients that it really is varying district to district, and how the different positivity rates in the districts, and whether there's been movement to resume in person or not.
So thanks, Megan. And I would add to that if the timeline has not run yet, and even if it has, if assessments are being conducted, parents can ask that the remaining steps of the process be expedited, so that at least, if it's an initial assessment, There's then that period of time to review the assessments, and then the development of an IEP if the child's found eligible. And then, it's a fairly lengthy process. So the parent can ask that the rest of the process be collapsed and expedited, so that there's a possibility that the student could get an IEP implemented relatively close to when it would have been implemented if the assessments had been done on time. If the timeline has already, is already passed, and child's been waiting months, what I think the family should try to do, if it's not an initial, if it's a reevaluation or a new assessment, if that assessment results in a change in the student's services, more services, different services, then the family should figure out what was the delay. When would the assessment have been completed, and when was it actually completed? And that would be the amount of time to request compensatory services for that delayed assessment. That if the assessment had been done on time, the child would have gotten services sooner. There is another option for families who have the resources. There are private providers who are doing in-person assessments. And we, through this whole pandemic, have really tried to look at the issues of assessments and of service provision for students who need in-person services, similarly to the way that we look at the issue of placement. If the public school system, or under federal law and state law, if the public school does not have an appropriate program for the student, then it's required to place the child in a non-public program at public expense. So we have pretty much been saying, if the child needs an assessment and the school system's response is, we can't or we won't provide that assessment right now, the parent, one option is for the school system to contract with a private provider and pay for it. I mean, it's still, we would argue, the obligation of the school system, because those timelines have not been waived, to get that assessment done. Another option is for the parent to provide that 10-day notice they would provide if they were placing the child privately, to provide that 10-day notice and say, we're going to go get a private assessment done because you're not doing an assessment, and we're going to seek reimbursement. So that is an option, but that's an option really for families who have the ability to do that, which is not always, for many families, that's not possible. We have had some success arguing for in-person services for students who either can benefit from distance learning but need in-person support to be able to access distance learning and participate, or for students who actually need in-home instruction because they can't benefit from distance learning. We're making a little bit of headway with that, and are arguing that the schools, because the obligation to provide a free appropriate public education still a requirement, and there are students who just cannot, as you also identify, there are students who just cannot benefit from distance learning. So families need to know that the school system, the IEP team, is still responsible for determining what constitutes free appropriate public education. They still have an obligation to implement the IEP. And if it's not going to happen effectively through distance learning, they need to look at an alternative. I mean, another alternative would be to temporarily place the child in a non-public school that's open and serving students in person. But they can't just say, sorry, the only thing we're offering is distance learning and you're stuck with it. That's not okay. So we've been doing mediations, we're requesting due process hearings, and we're doing what we need to do to try to move the needle, because it's, the longer this goes on, the more harmed students are by this.
So we've had some questions to come in, Leslie. We have one caller who's concerned about regression and the need for more services, and as a result, wanting to ask for compensatory services related to that regression, without giving up the right to ask for comp services at a later date. Also, how can families get more services because a child has regressed and the team has been made aware of the regression?
Megan?
Okay, so I'll address the first of the questions first in terms of if if your child is regressing, and how do you approach compensatory services, recovery services. So the first thing I'll say is one thing that we've been repeating week after week in these question and answers is that we, strongly urge all parents who have concerns about their child's ability to benefit from distance learning to keep a log, of your child's progress or lack of progress. It could be sort of a video, a video log. It could be in a notebook. But keeping a log and sort of collecting your own data as to why distance learning isn't working for your child, why they're not able to access it or participate in it. If they're missing related services, you're keeping a log of the related services that they're missing. If they aren't, if you feel like as the parent that they're not sort of benefiting from the related services, doing everything you can to sort of document and keep your own data. But with respect to regression, failure to make progress, I think the first thing is right now we're trying, the school system needs to sort of mitigate any harm. And so it's easy to say, once students are returned in person, in school, they'll have the assessments, we'll determine the harm, we'll determine, what regression there's been, and then we'll figure out how to provide those compensatory services. But I know parents are saying, but what about right now? It doesn't make sense to just say, okay, we're going to catch them up on the back end while the harm's still happening now. And so I think going to those IEP meetings and saying, really talking through with the team about the harm that you're seeing and the regression, and having a conversation about what can be put in place now so that your child isn't falling further behind. If you feel like they're, losing ground on their reading goals or, their reading levels, can you ask for reading tutoring? Can you ask for some sort of supplemental reading services or tutoring? Whatever sort of the concern is, going into the team and trying to see what can be put in place now to stop that. And then I think once students are returned in person, there are going to have to be IEP team meetings where students are assessed, and there's individual assessments to determine, has there been regression, lack of progress, and what type of compensatory or recovery services are needed to put, the student in the place that they would have been, but for the harm that was caused from distance learning. So that's sort of, and Leslie, you can certainly add on, but I do think it's really important to push the IEP team to figure out right now what can be done to mitigate that harm, so that once they are returned in school, the compensatory services that are owed to your student aren't going to be as great. What can be done now to minimize that?
I completely agree. And maybe a helpful way to think about this is that because the obligation on the part of the school system to provide a free, appropriate public education is still in place. It doesn't really matter where the services are taking place. I mean, they're taking place in a different way. That's true. but that obligation is in place wherever your child is. So if you think about it this way, if your child were in the brick and mortar building and was regressing, the IEP team would have to meet and they would have to make changes to the IEP. That's part of what's required by providing a free, appropriate public education. If the team was doing its job, it would not just let your child slide and say, oh, well, like do something about it down the road. So I wouldn't look at this any differently. The fact that education is happening remotely doesn't give the team a free pass to just delay doing something about the fact that your child is regressing now. So it's an issue really separate and apart from the issue of compensatory services. It's the issue of your child. If your child is going backwards right now, then the school is not delivering a free, appropriate public education, and there should be an IEP meeting, and the IEP should be revised. And if distance learning is not the way that a free, appropriate public education can be delivered, then the team needs to talk about alternative ways of delivering the services. And I think that's where I would land. And then and all of that, if it happened, would mitigate, as Megan said, the amount of compensatory services that will be owed later. I mean, one of the concerns about amassing a really large entitlement to compensatory services is, first of all, you can never really make up for what children don't get. And secondly, if that entitlement is really large, my concern will be that your child will never get all the services to which he or she is entitled, because it's going to amount to so many hours, and your child's going to rebel against, spending 2,000 hours in tutoring or whatever it's going to be. So I think I would just look at it as a free, appropriate public education issue, as well as that mitigation of harm. I think we have some other questions.
Yeah, we have another question from a Howard County parent who wants to know if hard copies of homework can be requested and how.
Absolutely. Just ask the team. It's something that if that is a way that your child needs to complete homework, or a way that you can support your child to complete homework, absolutely. Just make the request. And if the team says no, if you make any request that you make in the context of an IEP meeting, if the team refuses to grant your request, they have to provide prior written notice. They have to explain why they're not agreeing to your request and everything they're relying on in refusing to take that action, and all the assessments they're relying on, all the documents they're relying on. They have to explain why they're refusing. And it's pretty hefty. It's called prior written notice, and we can put the site into the chat box, the site to the regulations, or we'll put it in after. Or you can contact our office if you need it, but you can also just Google prior written notice IDEA and it will pop right up.
So we have another caller, viewer rather, who didn't identify her district, but wants to know about the school system's virtual learning not addressing the child's goals, and also that they're not appropriate, and how they can request funds to hire a private person for the purpose of tutoring and speech and language therapy to address those goals that the virtual learning is not addressing.
So I will quickly say that so at the beginning of this school year, so September 2020, all of the school districts should have been implementing your child's full brick and mortar IEP. So we know in the spring that some school districts were, say a child had 6 goals, we know that some districts were just picking 2 goals to work on. And that happened in the spring, but as of this school year, all of the goals that are in sort of the in-person brick and mortar IEP, the full IEP should be being implemented. And so your child should have all of the goals that they were, previously working towards in their brick and mortar IEP. they should also be getting all of their related services. So nothing should be sort of reduced because of distance learning. So you want to go back to the IEP that they had before the closures in the spring, or if you've had an annual IEP since. You want to make sure that all of the goals and all of the related services are being implemented and received. And then I think it just, your question about if you feel like your child isn't making progress on their goals, or you feel like they're not, the related services aren't meaningful, and your child isn't making progress with respect to the related services. I think it goes back to, what Leslie was saying is, reaching out, requesting an IEP team meeting, expressing your concerns about a lack of progress, and sort of having that conversation. Is your child receiving a free, appropriate public education? Are there revisions that need to be made to the IEP to ensure that your child is receiving a free, appropriate public education through distance learning? And maybe what additional accommodations or adaptations need to be put in place in the virtual environment so that your child can better access distance learning.
And I think the other part of the question was about reimbursement and how to get reimbursement. Tasha, am I remembering correctly? You're muted.
Oh, you're muted.
Tasha, you're muted.
Thought I hit it. I moved too fast. It's about how to get, how to request funds to hire a private person to provide treatment and other services.
Right. So, I think then it's really hoping that the IEP team will agree, as Megan was just saying. But the team won't give you upfront funding. It would have to be a team decision that this is what's appropriate for your child, and then the school system would be responsible. For those parents who are able to pay privately and seek reimbursement, it would just say that in the context of placement, because parents place their child and then seek reimbursement for placement, there's a requirement in the law that that parents give 10 days notice to the school system, or they could potentially not be allowed to get the reimbursement. There's a little bit of a disagreement among those of us who do special education law about whether, in the context of trying to get private providers, parents should give that 10 days notice, because it's not the same situation, but we think it's analogous enough. We think it's similar enough that to be on the safe side, if by any chance you are going to hire a private provider and then ask for reimbursement from the school system, you should give them 10 days notice that you are going to do that and that you intend to seek reimbursement. But you're not going to get funds from the school system to go hire somebody. It would have to be the school system contracting with or accepting invoices from a provider after they have made a decision that that's what's appropriate for your child. Do we have any other questions, Tasha? Because I know we're bumping up against our timeline here.
No, we actually don't have any other questions.
Okay. Then we want to thank the people who joined us. Thank you, Anne, for being our special guest today. And
Thanks, Anne.
We will be back here in 2 weeks, hopefully with our captioning, with Susanna available to interpret. And we look forward to seeing you. Thank you so much.
Leslie, we have one last question that slid in, and that's
okay.
It's pretty long. Can you request observations from a specialist if your child is receiving specific interventions, but you don't believe it's being implemented properly? For example, if a child is in Orton Gilliam, but the teacher isn't implementing it with fidelity, can you ask for someone who specializes in that to observe some classes? Also, if the team says your child is getting that intervention, but they really are not because it's not being implemented correctly, can you ask for that to be made up by someone who knows how to implement the interventions?
Okay, so I'll just grab this one, Megan. And the answer to the first question is yes, you can certainly ask for an observation. You can ask for an observation by another school system person. Also, we know that there are outside consultants, education consultants, who have been doing observations by Zoom or Google Meets or whatever the platform is that the school system is using. So parents would arrange that the same way that they would arrange an observation if it were taking place in a brick and mortar building. And secondly, I think this isn't any different than in a brick and mortar building. If you think that your child is not getting a service that's on the IEP, you can challenge that. You can request a meeting, you can raise your concerns, you can ask that, other providers be involved, but it's not an issue that's any different because services are being delivered remotely than it would be if your child were in a brick and mortar building. So you can, as long as you have evidence, you can raise it in a meeting and then you can pursue dispute resolution if you need to. Anything that you want to add to that, Megan?
No, I was just going to say, you can always, if there's, specific questions for any child, you can always reach out to our intake line as well.
Yeah. So again, thank you for joining us. Please come back in 2 weeks, and we're happy to answer any questions. In the meantime, reach out to Susanna if you have questions about your any particular questions about your child or any issues about your child. Thanks again, Anne. Thanks, Megan, Tasha, Susanna, and we will call this a wrap and hope to see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.